Hello, my name is Cece Garrett. I'm a clinical social worker who specializes in working with individuals, families, and agencies impacted by hoarding disorder. Over on my Penn site page, I have this Ask Me Anything, submit a question, and then I record a video response that I send directly to the person who asked the question. And I record it so that I can also share it with others because one of the things I find is that the questions that I have and I find the courage to ask, many times other people have the same question but maybe don't have the courage to ask. And this Ask Me Anything button, just like the current person has submitted, really stays really anonymous. You don't even have to tell me much about yourself, just your question, right? I get an email address at the end just so I can send you the response. But this is a really great question. I'm really glad it was asked, and it really speaks to what it's like for really adult children who've grown up in a house where hoarding is an issue. Hoarding comes with a lot of secrecy, a lot of shame. Even when our parents maybe say there isn't a problem, we're still keeping secrets. We're still trying to stay disconnected. Our family system is disconnected from other social supports. Or if we have some bridges, we're not being really authentic and vulnerable. So, that said, here's the question that I received recently. What are small ways to practice trusting people to help when you've been conditioned to not let in outsiders? It's a great question. It's something that I'll tell you, even after working my own personal recovery for over 15 years now, I still find myself getting tripped up in. And recently in a group meeting, someone shared this term, toxic self-reliance. And that really resonated with me. And I think it really resonates with this question. Again, coming from a family where hoarding is an issue, there's just a lot of secrecy, a lot of keeping things in the family we don't share with others. And so when we do go out, we go out with a mask. They can't see us. We maybe even have some armor on, so to keep us strong. So my response is there's really two ways to look at this question. One is the idea of being known, becoming vulnerable so that people outside the family can actually know us, recognize our hurts and our needs, and then join us in our vulnerability to support us and help us. The second part of that is this idea of actually letting others help us, right? So these are actually making bids for clear help. Can you pick up milk on your way home? Could you stop and grab, at lunch, at work, asking a coworker to grab you a napkin and, a plastic fork from the office kitchen? So here's the thing, though, whether we're looking at this in the idea of being known and taking off a mask or being vulnerable enough to ask someone to help, again, it all comes back to this idea of vulnerability. I want to start with tasks first. So the asking someone to do something for us, because I think that in some ways it's easier. So how do we do that? Well, it's exposure work. It's just like any other exposure work. We make a list of things and we then make recognize, rate how difficult it would be to ask somebody to do it and how much risk is involved. So asking the coworker to grab a napkin and a plastic fork from the kitchen down the hall at lunch for you is probably, initially maybe has some distress of like, and maybe you're thinking like, I don't know who specifically sent this message. So maybe this wouldn't be so difficult, but for some people it might. There's this, again, coming back to that toxic self-reliance. I should get up and go do it. So if I don't get up and go do it, I can't ask somebody else to do it. But again, in the grand scheme of things, asking them, really the worst thing they can say is no. Well, the other might be you ask them, they say yes, and then they forget. And what ends up happening? Well, this is a low risk in the big picture because you're probably not going to be catastrophically wounded by them forgetting, right? And it's something that you can do easily to fix if, in fact, they forget, don't do it, right? So, this is something where we would call a baby step, starting step. And then over time, we increase the risk and vulnerability of our asks until we get to a point where we recognize that we have a need that we can't fulfill on our own. And what are those needs that we have that we can't fulfill on our own? Well, we got mirror neurons. There's a lot of things that for us to do well, we need to do it in relationship with a person. Different levels of relationships for sure. But there are going to be times where, I think of starting therapy as a therapist, what it takes for a client to sit down and ask for help, right? Extremely vulnerable, high risk, because what if I said, I can't, I won't? Why would you ask, right? Now, to be fair, I don't do that, but it's a worry that sits there. So that's the idea of starting and increasing based on the distress we feel, the risk involved with if the person fails us in helping when we're talking about tasks. Now, as far as being known, this gets a little bit harder. I like to start with this idea of committing to sharing with others only what you're comfortable with being repeated. Let me say that again. Only share with others what you're comfortable with being repeated. Outside of therapy, outside of meeting with a lawyer, there are risks inherently of telling someone something. And for me personally, how I've managed that is if I don't want somebody else to hear it outside of the person I'm telling it to, then I'm not going to share it. That is something that stays with me. Now, as we begin to practice this, we get better at what those things are. As a therapist, I'll tell you the secrets I hold super, super tight is my clients' secrets, their stories, and everyone else's, because it's not my job to share other people's stories. So this comes back to this idea of being known, being vulnerable with other people. Trust your gut about who's safe. What does it mean to be safe? Well, a safe person isn't going to share every story that they've been told. And to some extent, even if you had trauma and you have a lot of anxiety around people, most of us can still tell the difference between hypervigilant anxiety about any sort of risk and a person who we really actually know is unsafe. We just have to trust our gut. And I know that many of us were told when we had those, because sometimes we had those feelings about family members, and we were told by parents, caregivers, people in authority that we were wrong. And that's really messed up. I get that. But when we really trust our gut, those sensations are, in fact, for most of us, clearly different than just, ooh, I'm nervous. Like, is this person going to repeat this? And then again, for me, that comes back to, why am I telling this if this is a person who I'm concerned is going to repeat this? So when you're with somebody, are they talking with you about lots of other people and their stuff? If so, probably not the person to share that stuff with, right? If they're talking about others, they're going to talk about me. They're going to talk about you. It's a great question. And really, we just have to kind of take some steps in starting small and then increasing and increasing and increasing. And I think, especially when we're talking about vulnerability in relationships with others, where it's not task, but it's actually the idea of sharing who we are, our hurts, our wounds, it's really scary. So we start small. Did you know I had a parent who hoarded? Did you know I couldn't have people over to my house? I'm really embarrassed about that, right? But I don't share that with everybody. I didn't share that with everybody initially. And then over time, learning how to read and trust the people who don't talk about others as being safe people, and trusting what my body tells me about people. We can read each other's energy. We can tell the people who are unsafe. Learn to embrace and sit with that. Thanks again for this amazing question. I know it's something that a lot of adult children with parents who hoard struggle with, especially as they're transitioning, moving out of the home, trying to build significant social support apart from the family. And I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to answer this. That said, if you're watching this now and you're saying, Cece, I have a question, look down in the description box. There's a link to ask me anything about hoarding or overcoming being a child with a parent who hoards. And hopefully you'll get your answer directly, and I'll create a video just like this one for everybody else. Take it one day at a time, one breath at a time. You can learn to trust. It's hard, but it's worth it.